So namaste. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Anam Cara Thursday night meditation program. It's a real privilege and honor, so with all my heart I welcome you to our program tonight, and so good to be back with everybody. We've had a couple of weeks hiatus, and that's why my arm is in a sling here. Some people knew I was having some surgery to fix up some old injuries, and that's successful, and I want to thank everybody who sent me those warm and loving messages and good wishes for a speedy recovery, and I think we're in progress on that. So it's good to be back and be able to gather together again and support each other in doing our practices and living them into the world, especially at this time, in this age of Kali Yuga. In the Eastern traditions, Kali Yuga means the dark age, because Dharma, that dedication to right living and morality, is at its lowest ebb in the cycle of ages. And actually later on in the program, I'll be reading a story that's related to that. So this evening, we're going to be, in a few moments, doing the opening mantras. And the opening mantras, as people know, are a way of invoking our own highest nature. You know, the practices that we do, the practices that are really the root of the Eastern yogic traditions, but Western traditions as well, are all about how do we get to know the infinite, the divine, however we want to call it, and be able to live from being informed by that, being immersed in that, living in that presence as the presence of our own self, and being able to gather together and support each other in that, share each other's power and strength of practices, is a way that further enables us to be able to live that into the world. The opening mantras are both an invocation of our highest nature, and in that way they're also a practice for the mind, so that the mind gets right now, right here, in this time, in this place, in this moment, to come home to your true nature and set aside all that's happened for the day, all that's happened for the weeks and months and whatever may have been going on, and come into this moment. The practices bring us into the moment, because it's in the living presence, in the moment, that we encounter that sublime reality, knowing the divine as our own self and being able to see that in all other beings. And then, according from that, be able to treat them with the love, the compassion, the wisdom, the joy that's inherent to our nature. So the mantras are a really accessible means for being able to do that. That's why we spend a lot of time either talking about mantras, practicing chants with mantra, because they're so accessible. And in the yoga tradition, mantra and that as a practice was seen as particularly important in this age, in Kali Yuga, because it's an easy practice to do. It's something that can take the mind and draw it into the heart, the living presence of the divine within. And in this time, we're so easily distracted. There are so many things going on in so many different ways. Challenging things, great things, happy things, enervating things, all kinds of things. And all clamoring for our attention. So mantra is a way of gathering the power of the mind and bringing it home to the self, so that then it's both informed and further empowered. So it helps also to remove the fatigue of the mind that sets in from dealing with all these things and being lost to the highest. So we'll begin with those opening mantras. If you know them, you're welcome to chant along. If you don't know them, you're welcome to simply listen. But listen with the idea that this is an invocation, a throb, a pulsation, as mantra is, of your highest nature. So it's not necessarily about the meaning. It's more that encoded in the sound of mantra is the actual living presence of the infinite from which mantra arises. When we finish the opening mantras, they don't take long, we'll just sit for a few moments in that stillness, because it's in the stillness that we come to directly know what our true nature is, and what's the nature of the divine unfolding all around us and through all beings. So here we begin. Shrimata Kali Devi Ki Jaya Gajananam Bhutanganari Sevitam Kapitan Jambu Palachar Vakshanam Umasutam Shokam Vinashakarakam Namami Vigneshwara Parapankajam Shri Lanishaya Namaha Shri Lanishaya Namaha Shri Lanishaya Namaha Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamidaya Purnamevavashishate Om Shanti 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 Shrimata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai. So namaste. Once again, with all my heart and all my love, I welcome you to this evening's program. And tonight is the second Thursday night of the month, and we go through a cycle with the different Thursday evenings. And so tonight is usually kind of a reading contemplation. And so, you know, in practice, and I remember Trungpa, Choyam Trungpa Rinpoche, one of my early teachers, used to talk about, you know, there's three components that are important to be a part of a program. And that is for people to be able to hear the truth, have a chance to, while they're hearing it, contemplate that, and then be able to meditate on that so that you really imbibe it and merge with that. And our programs always include these different components of hearing the various teachings and truths and their various expressions from the great traditions, and contemplating them, meditating on them, and being further empowered to then walk that into the world. So tonight I wanted to share with you, this is a tale from what I call the Cradle Tales of Hinduism. I bought this book almost 50 years ago. So it's been a real favorite of mine for many years. And I remember reading some of the stories to my daughter when she was very little. And this is a collection that was written by a woman named Sister Nivedita. And she was a disciple of the very famous teacher, Swami Vivekananda, who was a disciple of Ramakrishna. So this was put out by the Advaita Vedanta Society, the non-dual Vedantic Society. She was born in roughly 1867 or so, and born in Ireland, and then was in England teaching, I think as a part of a religious education school, met Swami Vivekananda, who was in London doing some lectures, and became his disciple and moved to India. And over the years, she became a teacher in that tradition and gathered together this wonderful collection of stories that are from a variety of components of the Hindu tradition. And this story tonight, it's known as the Ascent of Yudhishthira, the Ascent of Yudhishthira to heaven. And Yudhishthira was a very great king. I mean, he's a prominent figure in what's known as the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is the longest epic poem in all of human literature. And it's an exquisite exploration of Dharma and Adharma, good and evil, and the play of that in the world. And it comes to a crescendo with a large battle. And the famous one chapter of the Mahabharata that many people have heard of is the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter of this longer epic work called the Mahabharata. And Yudhishthira is the king with his 4 brothers, and they're known as the 5 Pandavas. So Yudhishthira is a Pandava, and they're the kings. They get displaced by an evil king, Duryodhana, and his relatives and grandfather, Dhritarashtra, and it goes on and on and on. So this is just one little ending story from this major epic that is really a wonderful thing to be able to read and get into. And it's all about Dharma, because the entire unfolding of the Mahabharata is all the nuances. It's not just black and white. Good and evil is not just a starkly contrasted thing. There are good people who do some not so good things, and then they have their consequences. There are evil people who may do dharmic things, and what comes of that? So there was a real exploration of all the shades of gray on this. But Yudhishthira, except for one human fault that tripped him up at one point, was seen as an extraordinarily dharmic person, sort of the king of dharma righteousness. And this story that Sister Nivedita tells is at the end of his life, the end of the reign, when finally the Pandavas had defeated the evil, taken over the kingdom, but now their time has come, and it's the end. And so this is a story about Yudhishthira and his brothers and what comes at the end. So I'll start with this. Now, to Arjuna, so Arjuna, who is famous in the discourse of the Bhagavad Gita, is between Lord Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield. So Arjuna is one of the Pandavas. To Arjuna, when Lord Krishna passed away, the whole earth became blank. Lord Krishna was his guru. He was completely devoted to him, as were all the Pandavas. He could no longer string his great bow, the Gandhava, and his divine weapons failed to come to his hand at need, for he could not concentrate his mind upon them. Therefore he understood that his time had also ended. He and his brothers had accomplished their great purpose, and their lives had fulfilled that. The moment had come for their departure from this world. For to all it is known that understanding and courage and foresight arise in us only so long as the days of our prosperity are not outrun, and all alike leave a man when the hour of his adversity strikes. Such things have time only for their root. It is time, indeed, that is the seed of the universe. And verily, it is time who takes back all at its own pleasure. Now Arjuna saw, therefore, that to the place whence his invincible weapons had come to him, and thither they had been withdrawn again, having in the day given them, achieved their victories that had been theirs, and he realized, moreover, that when the time for his use of them should again approach, they would return of their own accord into his hands. Now this little detail, it just sort of slips along in the story, points out something, especially in the Indian understanding and Hindu understanding of how the cycles repeat themselves. So he's wise. He knows, yes, the weapons came to him as a divine gift. Now it's time for them to leave. And he's thinking, when I need them again, they will return. Even though as the story unfolds and he starts out with, these are the end of my days, it's time for me to leave. But they know the cycle keeps going. You also see this in the Ramayana when Hanuman drops his ring, Lord Ram's ring, and it falls into the bottom of the ocean, and there are these sages sitting there, and there's a pile of Ram's rings, and Hanuman gets all confused and goes, what? How can there be so many rings? He goes, oh, every time this happens, you drop it. They're always here. You'll always be able to find it. Don't worry. Because time cycles over and over and over again. So meanwhile, it was for himself and his 4 brothers to set their faces resolutely towards the attainment of their highest goal. And Yudhishthira, King Yudhishthira, their elder brother, fully agreed with this thought of Arjuna. He said, you must see, he said to him, that it is time who fastens the fetters. It is time who loosens the bond. And his brothers, understanding the illusion, could utter only one word, time, time, time. It is time. So the Pandavas and their queen, Draupadi, being thus entirely at one in the decision that the empire was over for them, the question of succession was quickly arranged. The entreaties of citizens and subjects were overruled, successors and a protector installed in different capitals, and farewell was taken of the kingdom. Having thus done their duty as sovereigns, Yudhishthira and his brothers, with Draupadi, turned to the performance of personal religious rites. And donning the coverings of a renunciate of only birch bark, they fasted for many days, received the blessings of priests, and then each took the fire from his domestic altar, the fire that had been lighted for him on his marriage and kept alight, worshipped and tended ever since by his wife and himself in person, and threw that flame into the consecrated water. This was the last act of their lives in the world, and as it was performed and the brothers turned themselves to the east, all the women in the assembled court burst into tears. So it was this act of renouncing even being a householder, being sovereigns, gone, throw the fire into. They attended it every day of their life with that kind of devotion to keep the living flame as a representation, that living flame of the infinite. That living flame is extraordinary. And to tend a flame like that, I remember doing this many years ago by Baba's suggestion, to keep an oil lamp lit in your home and tend it each day, trimming the wick, adding oil, tending it as a living, breathing flame of the divine in your home. That sacrifice, that sacred presence, that illuminates our lives. They're letting it go. They're casting it aside. But for the great happiness which shone now in their faces, it would have seemed to all as if the Pandavas were once more leaving Hastinapura, their great city, poor and defeated at dice, for their exile in the forest. That's part of what happened earlier on in the story of the Mahabharata. Followed for some distance by a crowd of citizens and by the ladies of the royal household, the little procession went forward. None, however, daring to address the king or plead with him for possible return. After a time, the citizens went back, and those members of the Pandava family who were left behind ranged themselves about their new king as their center, and those of the royal consorts who were daughters of the reigning houses, they set forth accompanied by traveling escorts for their fathers' kingdoms. Those who were related to the succeeding sovereign took their places behind him, and so, receiving farewells and benisons from all, the Pandavas, Yudhishthira, Bhima, Arjuna and the twins Nakula and Sahadev looked their last on the world that they were leaving and went onward, followed by Draupadi, their queen. But Yudhishthira was in fact the head of a party of 7, for hard upon their footsteps followed a dog, whose affection for them all was so great that he would not desert them. Well, long was the journey and arduous, and it was made barefoot, clad only in birch bark. And it was but by these who had only yesterday had at their command all the resources of the earth, now went forth as mendicants. It was their intention to practice the life of renunciation in the mountains far to the north. But first they would worship the land that they were leaving by traveling around it in a ceremonial circle. Nothing had they left save their garments of birch bark. Only Arjuna, reluctant to part from them, carried his mighty bow, the Gandhava, and his 2 inexhaustible quivers of arrows. Thus many days passed, and suddenly, as the little procession of pilgrims reached the shores of the great sea that lies on the east, they found their road barred by one whose presence was like unto a veritable mountain. Closing the way before them stood God Agni, the Lord of fire, divinity of the 7 flames, and the Pandavas waited with folded hands to receive his commands. From the ocean I brought Gandhava, O Arjuna, said the devourer of forest, to thine aid. To ocean again, then, let thy weapons be restored. Along with the discus of Krishna, let Gandhava vanish from the world, but know that when his hour shall again strike, he of his own accord will come once more into thine hand. Thus adjured and urged also by his brothers, Arjuna came forward, and standing on the shore, hurled into the sea with his own hands his priceless bow, Gandhava, and his 2 inexhaustible quivers. And the god of fire, satisfied with this supreme renunciation, disappeared before them. Well, on and on went the pilgrims, and until the circle of their worship was complete. From the salt sea they proceeded southwest, then they turned north, and passing Dwarka, the city beloved of Krishna, they saw it covered by the waters of the ocean. For even so it had been prophesied that all the things that they had known shall pass away. Just like a dream. At last they reached the Himalayas, home of the meditating ones. Here were the great forest, here the mighty snow-peaked mountains, where the mind could be stilled and quieted and centered in itself. And beyond, in the dim north, lay Mount Meru, the mountain of the gods. And here it was, as they journeyed on, with faces set ever to the goal, that all their errors of all their lives took shape and bore fruit. They had been but small, these sins of the Pandavas. Oh, a thought of vanity here, a vain boast unfulfilled there. Yet small as they were, they had been sufficient to flaw those lives that without them would have been all perfect. And one by one, the heroic pilgrims turned faint with a mortal faintness, stopped and fell dead. Only in the clear mind of Yudhishthira, the king of justice and righteousness, as his subjects had loved to call him, in that clear mind, with its trained sense of human conduct, rose the knowledge of its cause with each disaster that befell them. Even he himself, it is said, could not altogether escape the common lot of imperfection. And as he felt the very pang of death shoot through one foot where it touched the earth, he remembered a shadow that had fallen upon him once and stained his own truth. But with him there could be no rebellion against that bright. He shed no tear and uttered no sigh. Rather did his own purpose shine clearer and stronger before him at each defeat of his little party. And thus Yudhishthira, not even looking back, proceeded alone, followed by the dog. Now suddenly there was a deafening peal of thunder, so overwhelming that the two stood still on the mountainside. Then came towards them, as it were, a cloud of light. And when this had become clear, the hero beheld in the midst of it Indra, Lord Indra, god of heaven, standing in his chariot. It is ordained, thou chief of the race of Bharata, that thou shalt enter the realm of heaven in this thy human form. Wherefore do thou herewith ascend this chariot, said the god. Nay, Lord of 1,000 deities, answered the king, my brothers have all fallen dead, and without them at my side I have no desire to even enter heaven. Nor could any one of us, indeed, accept felicity if the delicate Draupadi, our queen, were banished to regions of hardship. Let all therefore go in with me. But thou shalt behold them all when thou reachest the abode of blessedness, said the god. Verily, they have but ascended there before thee. Wherefore yield thee not to grief, O chief of the Bharatas, but rise with me in thy mortal form. The king bowed his head in acceptance of the invitation, and then stood aside to let the dog go first into the chariot. But Indra intervened. Today, O king, thou hast won immortality, happiness and victory, and a throne like unto my own. These are all yours, but send away the dog, and enjoy what thou hast achieved. How difficult it is to be an Aryan, said Yudhishthira, to do a deed unworthy of an Aryan? How could I enjoy that prosperity for which I had cast off one who was devoted? Said Indra, for men with dogs there is no place in heaven. Thou art the just. Abandon thou this dog. In doing this there will be no cruelty. But Yudhishthira answered slowly, nay, great Indra, to abandon one who has loved us is infinitely sinful. Never till my life ends shall I give up the terrified, nor one who has shown me devotion, nor those who have sought my protection or my mercy, nor any who is too weak to protect himself. Never have I done this. Never, never shall I stoop to do it. Therefore do I refuse, out of mere desire for my own happiness, to abandon this dog. In the king's voice there was no possibility of reconsideration. Yudhishthira has made up his mind. This was the Dharma. He would not be moved. Yet still the deity argued with him. By the presence of a dog, heaven itself would be made unholy. Thou knowest that his mere glance would take away from the consecrated all its sacredness. Wherefore, O king, art thou then so foolish? Thou hast renounced thine own brothers and Draupadi. Why should thou not renounce this dog? Yudhishthira said, it is well known that one cannot but renounce the dead, for then there are neither enemies nor friends. I did not abandon my brothers or Draupadi so long as they were alive. I only left them when I was unable to revive them. Not even the frightening of one who had sought our protection, nor the slaying of a woman, nor stealing from a Brahmin, nor treachery from a friend, would now appear to me a greater sin than to leave this dog. And lo, as he finished speaking, the dog vanished, and in its place was the radiant presence of Dharma, the very god of righteousness. Hail, O Yudhishthira, he said, thou who hast renounced the very chariot of the celestials on the behalf of a dog. Ah, verily in heaven None is equal to thee. Regions of inexhaustible happiness are thine. And then, surrounded by the chariots of the god, Yudhishthira the just, the king of righteousness, seated in the car of glory, ascended into heaven in his mortal form. And entering it, he was met by all the immortals, eager to welcome him into their midst, eager to praise him as he deserved. But Yudhishthira, looking around and seeing nowhere his brothers nor Draupadi, said only, happy or unhappy, whatever the region that is now my brother's and my queen, to that and nowhere else do I desire to go. But why, remonstrated Indra, dost thou still cherish human affections? Thy brothers are also happy, each in his own place. Verily I see that thou art but a mortal. Human love still binds thee. Look, this is heaven. Behold around thee those who have attained to the regions of the gods. But Yudhishthira answered, Nay, conqueror of the demons, I cannot dwell apart from them. Wherever they have gone, thither and not elsewhere will I go. And at that very moment, King Yudhishthira's eyes, sweeping heaven again in his first eager search for those he loved, caught sight first of Duryodhana, and then of his foe's brothers, and finally the whole 101 sons of Dhritarashtra, blazing like the sun, wearing all the signs of glory that belong to heroes and seated on thrones like gods. At this sight, Yudhishthira was filled with rage. I will not, he shouted in anger, dwell even in the regions of happiness with the vain and reckless Duryodhana. For him were our friends and kinsmen slaughtered. By him was my queen insulted. Listen to me, ye gods. I will not even look upon such as these. Let me go there whither my brothers have gone. But, great king, said one of those about him, smiling at his fury, this should not be. In heaven do all feuds cease. By pouring himself like an oblation on the fire of battle, by remaining unterrified in moments of great terror, has Duryodhana attained a celestial joys. Do thou forget thy woes. This is heaven, O Lord of men. Here there can be no enmity. If such as he could have deserved this, answered Yudhishthira, no whit appeased, what must not my friends and kindred have deserved? Let me go to the company of the righteous. What are the celestial regions to me without my brothers? Where they are must be itself heaven. This place, in my opinion, is not so. So seeing the king so determined, the gods turned and gave orders to the celestial messenger, saying, Do thou show unto Yudhishthira his friends and kinsmen, and turning his face away from the regions of blessedness, yet keeping still in the world of the gods, the divine guide made to do their bidding, and went forward, followed by King Yudhishthira. Dread and terrible was the road by which they now journeyed, dark and polluted, difficult. It was noisome with foul odors, infested with stinging insects, and made dangerous by fearful roaming beasts of prey. It was skirted on either side by a running fire, and in its strange twilight could be seen sights of nameless terror. Here and there lay human bones. It seemed to be full of evil spirits and to abound in inaccessible fastnesses and labyrinthine paths. On went the messenger of the gods, and on behind him followed the king, his mind every moment sinking deeper and deeper into his thoughts of anguish. At last they reached a gloomy region where was a river whose waters appeared to boil, foaming, throwing up clouds of sulphurous vapors. The leaves of the trees, moreover, were sharp like swords. Here also were deserts of fine sand, luminous to the sight, heated white with heat. The very rocks and stones were made of hot iron. There were terrible thorns also, innumerable cauldrons filled with boiling oil. In such forms did they behold tortures which were inflicted upon sinful men. Seeing this region of the night abounding thus in horror, Yudhishthira said to his guide, how much further must we travel along paths like these? What world of the gods is this? I command thee at once to disclose to me where my brothers are. The messenger stopped. Thus far, O king, is your way. It was the command of the denizens of heaven that, having come to this point, I was to return. As for yourself, if you, O Yudhishthira, the just, should be wearied, you have the right of return with me. Stupefied by noxious vapors, and with his mind sunk in heaviness, the king turned around and took a few steps back. As he did so, however, moaning voices and sobs broke out in the thick darkness about him, saying, "Stay, stay," sighed the voices. "Our pain is lessened by the presence of Yudhishthira. A sweet breeze, a glimpse of light. Come with thee, O king. Please, leave us not in this instant." "Alas, alas," said Yudhishthira to his companion. In his compassion, he immediately stood still amongst these souls in hell. And as he listened, however, the voices appeared to be strangely familiar. "Who are you? Who are you?" he exclaimed to one and another as he heard them. And great beads of sweat stood on his brow as their unbodied groans shaped themselves out of the darkness into answers. "Arjuna, Draupadi, Karna, and all the rest." A moment passed. "Duryodhana in heaven," he pondered, "and these my kinsmen fallen into hell? Do I wake or do I dream? Or is this just some disorder of the brain? What justice can there be in this universe? Nay, for this crime shall I abandon the very gods themselves." At these words, uttered within himself by his own mind, the wrath of an all-powerful monarch awoke in the heart of Yudhishthira. "Go," he thundered in anger, turning himself to his guide. "Return now to the presence of those whose messenger thou art, and make known to them, I return not to their side. Here, where my brothers suffer, here, where my presence aids them, here and no other place do I eternally abide." The messenger bowed his head and passed swiftly out of sight. Up to high heaven passed he, carrying the defiance of Yudhishthira to Indra, chief of gods and men. And the king stood alone in hell, brooding over the unspeakable suffering of his kinfolk. But not for more than a moment, for in that brief time a cool and fragrant breeze began to blow. Light dawned, and all the repulsive sights disappeared. The boulders of iron, the cauldrons of oil, the thorny plants, this all vanished from sight. And Yudhishthira, raising his eyes, saw himself surrounded by the gods. "These illusions," they said, "are ended. Ascend thou to thine own place. Hell must indeed be seen by every king. Happy are they whose good deeds have been so many that they first suffer and afterwards enjoy. To thee and to these thy kindred, Yudhishthira, has hell been shown only by a kind of mirage. Come then, thou royal sage, behold here the heavenly Ganga. Plunge yourself into this milky way, and casting off there thy human form, divest yourself of it and all enmity and grief. Then rise, O friends and Draupadi, in those blessed regions wherein they already dwell, great even as Indra, enthroned in heaven." And so Yudhishthira, the Lord of righteousness on earth, the king of Dharma, true to that, Tested over and over. These are the kinds of tales that show. Each time he's tested, no. Is he going to abandon the dog? No. Then the dog turns out to be Dharma. Is he going to abandon it again for the pleasures, believing that his brothers in Draupadi or somewhere? No. He stays true to Dharma, true to Dharma. And that's one of the exquisite and repeated lessons over and over and over again in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, where Dharma is, victory is. That was the words that Gandhi quoted. Where there is Dharma, there will be victory. And who was Dharma? The Lord of Dharma in the Mahabharata, the incarnation of Dharma, was Lord Krishna. And so in this time when it's especially important that we embody Dharma, that we look to our own lives and see what are the ways that we can strengthen our sense of how do we carry that Dharma into the world, because it helps to set the right order. It helps to bring the compassion, the wisdom, the love, the joy, the equanimity that are our true nature into the world. It's Dharma Shakti, the power of Dharma, that then empowers us to stand clear in that and not retreat, not just go into meditation and not come out, not go into a cave and not come out, not disappear into a monastery and not come out. I tried that once. And my teacher sent me back, he knew. It's to live the Dharma in the world, to bring that into the world. And empowered by the practices, we can do that. Because the practices bring us home to the very source of Dharma, which is our own self, the living presence of the divine, that living presence that's in the root of who and what we are in all beings and all of creation. So we do the practices both to know that directly and then to empower the body and mind to walk that Dharma into the world like Yudhishthira, like the Pandavas, in the face of whatever we have to face, but we stay true to that. So what a great story from the Mahabharata. So now, in order to go to the very source, we'll chant the great mantra, the Maha Mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, for a few minutes. And at the end of that, we'll sit in stillness. And Om Namah Shivaya means I bow to the divine within. So it's an instruction to the mind. Bow to the divine, bow to the divine. But it's a throb of the divine itself. So if we let go of the mind and actually become absorbed in the mantra, absorbed mean we merge with it. We begin to recognize we are a throb of the mantra itself. We are a throb, a pulsation of the infinite ourselves. Even the mind is a throb of that. All we perceive is a throb of that. Coming home to that living experience, that living knowing directly the presence of the infinite in everything. And everything that's finite is the infinite. Everything that's finite is the infinite. But it takes going beyond the mind to know that directly. And that's what the practices empower us to do. So chant the slow Om Namah Shivaya for a few minutes, and then at the end, just sit in the stillness. If the mind moves, just gently keep bringing it back to Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, with the awareness of I am that. I am the auspicious one. Shiva means the auspicious one. I am the infinite. I am the boundless one. I am what holds all of creation in its loving embrace. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. So we'll chant for a few minutes and then sit in that stillness. At the end, we'll ring a gong. We'll chant a few rounds of the Om Namah Shivaya to close. Shrimata Kali Mahadevi Ki Jai. So we end with this prayer that may all our practices truly benefit everyone, and may all beings know complete freedom from suffering. Namaste. The Dharma, following the Dharma of a son, the Dharma of a daughter, the Dharma of a husband, the Dharma of a wife, the Dharma of a human being, the Dharma of our work, the Dharma, all to be informed by Dharma and supported by the power of Dharma, the Dharma Shakti, to bring us home so that we're in accord, we're in alignment, that this instrument of mind-body is an instrument of our own divine self. So when it's left to just pursue what the mind is doing, that could be troublesome. To become aligned with our highest nature, absorbed in that, with the mind so dipped in the dye of our sublime divine self that that color permeates every thought, every word, every action, then we are just naturally, spontaneously able to live in accord with Dharma. Until then, we practice. And keep coming back to that. So I want to thank you all for bringing the power of your practices, the power of your Dharma, the power of your commitment, and all the ways that you walk that into the world day by day. And because in the end, the hero's journey is both going into these other domains to be informed by the highest, to be transformed in mind and body, and then bring it back into the world. Walk your sublime nature, your love, your compassion, your joy, your boundless joy. Ananda, this rapturous, ecstatic joy, is also our inherent nature. And this underlying, then, unshakable equanimity in the face of whatever comes our way. So the practices then empower us to know, to go to the source of that and live it into the world moment by moment, day by day. So thank you all for coming and sharing the power of your practice. Thank you for doing the things that you do to help support Anam Cara and our Dharma, our seva, our selfless seva of offering this to anyone who wants it. So through our website, through these programs, through the YouTube, sharing that with others, and your generous donations that make this all possible. I'm deeply moved and very grateful for all of that. And so next week we'll be back on Thursday, and I hope you have a blessed week and walk in the light of Dharma, and know that that little dog, that little embodiment of Dharma is also devoted to you, is following you, uplifting you. And so with all my heart, with all my love, thank you for coming, and we'll see you next week.